Democratic Congressman Stephen Lynch of Massachusetts. He is a member of the Oversight Committee, and he was in today's interview with Bill Gates.
Well, Congressman, why do you believe Chairman Comer had an epiphany 24 hours later?
He probably talked to the White House. I think that was the reason for his change in attitude. However, we are still insisting that Todd Blanche come in under oath and testify. And in the past, I mean, that's how we got Pam Bondi in there. Was we relied on a couple of Republican members to allow us to pass that vote for a subpoena. So today's interview with Bill Gates was simply a transcribed interview. He was not under subpoena. But to get Blanche in and to require him to tell the truth, we would need him under oath.
You know, Congressman, I asked that question to my colleagues in the audience to sort of ponder that transition, that change of Mr. Comer. And it struck me as Alicia was reading us in that if the White House was so concerned to the point that they're having off-the-record meetings in the Situation Room without the president to go and figure out what to do about the non-release of the Epstein files on a series of bases, it still befuddles me why that urgency and that concern never translated to the members of the body in the majority. And why it took, you know, maybe a call from the White House or the president to finally get Mr. Comer to understand the urgency or the importance of the moment. Having that now as a backdrop, you sat in today and heard Bill Gates in his testimony. What did you take away from that? Do you sense that he was truthful and forthcoming with the information relative to the evidence that, at least partially, that you have? Because you don't have all 3 million, the remaining 3 million documents. We don't know what's in those, but let's work with what we got. We got a lot. Where do you see things with Mr. Gates?
I thought his testimony today was over about 4 hours, he was cooperative. He did not avoid questions. He did not obfuscate. He didn't try to avoid things. I mean, we had a lot of evidence out in front of us. Many of those emails were very cryptic, and we asked for explanations, and he provided those. He did push back a couple of times on emails that were written by Jeffrey Epstein to Jeffrey Epstein, but they had, you know, allegations about Bill Gates and his conduct. And he pushed back on those because, you know, he alleged that those allegations were not true. But I have to say he was forthright and he was apologetic because, you know, I asked him a question. I said, you know, Mr. Gates, the moment you met Jeffrey Epstein, he was already a registered sex offender.
Right.
So how do you have a multi-year relationship, business or otherwise, with someone who was accused of doing that? And he had no good response. But he did say that Epstein played him, wanted to get control of some of the funding, you know, not within the Gates Foundation, but Epstein had promised him that he would bring money from other sources to
help fund the foundation.
To help fund their work, not within the foundation, but, you know, he's got a global health initiative, does great work on that, by the way. But that was the law that Epstein put out there. In the end, you know, I have to say, based on what we saw on the documents, it was Melinda Gates, ironically, who put her foot down and said, look, I know about this guy's past. You cannot do. I don't want to see this guy again.
Can I just say, Congressman, we have some sound from Melinda Gates from an NPR interview that she did on February 3rd, and I just want to play this sound for you.
Okay.
For me, it's personally hard whenever those details come up, right? Because brings back memories of some very, very painful times in my marriage. So whatever questions remain there of what I can't even begin to know all of it, those questions are for those people and for even my ex-husband. They need to answer to those things, not me.
Did Bill Gates answer for those things? Because Melinda Gates, every time she has spoken about this, and it has been measured, and it has been few since the reports since their divorce was first reported and actually final, she has been very careful in what she has said. But the subtext, every time I hear Melinda Gates speak about this, is that Bill Gates has something he needs to say. And it's not for her to say it, it's for Bill Gates to say it. And I don't get the impression that he said it today during his testimony, but you were there.
Right.
Did he?
There was a moment here when Epstein was pursuing Bill Gates as a target, and that funding, that's what he was after. When Epstein actually had the information which was not public yet, that Gates had several, multiple extramarital affairs. It was not public yet. And he was using that, there were elements of blackmail there around that dynamic. So, I think that was, Bill Gates said that was the impetus for him to go to his wife and say, this is what happened.
So Bill Gates basically claimed in his testimony today that Jeffrey Epstein was blackmailing him and he wasn't really his friend. Okay.
There was elements of that, yeah.
There was another piece that Ranking Member Garcia brought up today that I want to play for our audience, and then I would like you to expound upon what we hear from the congressman.
It's important to note that Mr. Gates does understand that he was around people and likely assistants and those employed by Mr. Gates that were also abused. And so he was around people that were actually abused, and that was recognized in some of the discussion that we had inside.
I'm curious, if Bill Gates can make that concession, why have so many of the other people you have brought in for interviews not been able to make the same concession?
Yeah, that's on them. I do know that Gates was apologetic about that. That he said absolutely. I allowed my priority being the Global Health Initiative to get in the way of what the right thing that I should have done.
Is he saying he recognizes this retrospectively or in real time that he recognized that those women were being abused?
Well, he said on multiple occasions, he said once the Epstein files came out, he found the scope of all this and how many women. I mean, I think we're up over 1,000 in terms of people who have said that since 2001, when this began, to 2018, when Jeffrey Epstein took his own life, there were about 1,000 women that were impacted, some of them from Eastern Europe, some of them from Russia, many of them here in the United States. But, this was a network. He could not do this by himself, one man, even with Ghislaine Maxwell. It's
interesting, the connection or intersection of the desires of these very wealthy men that have probably nothing to do with the despicable part of Epstein's life, but they've got something that they want to promote and push out. Epstein knows that. Epstein figures out a way to worm his way in, get to know them. Yeah. But there's still, for me, that point that after the fact of his acknowledgement and conviction relative to sexual predation, these individuals still engaged with him. And I thought Representative Stansbury today really kind of pushed on that, and she responded relayed back to us what that conversation, what Mr. Gates said about that particular aspect of still going forward and asking, was it worth it? Was it really worth it to do all this? Yeah. This is what she had to say.
The language that he used is that in spite of knowing Mr. Epstein's reputation, he saw a narrow role for accessing potential donors for his global health initiatives. And so when I asked him, are you saying that the ends justified the means? He said, well, that's probably too strong of language, but I felt that getting billions of dollars for global health was worth it.
That's a very interesting. So it kind of feeds a little bit of what you put on the table about Epstein as playing the role of a little bit of a blackmailer, probably a lot of that. Yeah. But how was your reading of that moment and his justification or explanation for continuing? Because for me, that's the hardest part. I think all of us at this table, if we were doing business with or been approached by somebody who had that kind of a background and reputation that we knew of that was public, in terms of sexual, predation and going after young girls, I don't think I'd want to do business with them. I think if I'm Bill Gates, I already got a network. Right? I don't know if I really need Jeffrey Epstein's network. Yeah. Is Jeffrey Epstein's network bigger or better than Bill Gates' network?
Yeah.
So help me understand that and square that circle.
Yeah, there's another aspect of this too. So, Epstein was making this pitch that he could amplify what Bill Gates was doing with the Gates Foundation and this global health initiative. There were a couple of interventions. I mentioned the intervention by Melinda Gates. She came in and basically blew it up. But there were also other emails from people who knew Epstein. And they said, this guy, and there were emails. We didn't know who they were from because they were initially redacted. But they were to Bill Gates, and it said, be very careful. You need a healthy distance between yourself and Epstein. And he is a master manipulator. And in one sentence, it said, he will discover your priorities and your vulnerabilities and your proclivities, and he will capitalize on that. And that's what he did, right? Bill Gates was totally into the global health initiative. Well, that's where he went. He knew that was something that drove that man. And so that was his, that was his pitch.